short story called Working from Home. The hollow pounding of Cindy's fists on his bare chest awakened Glenn in his bed that morning. As he cracked his eyelids, the first thing he saw were the wild brunette curls of her hair swinging from her head with the rolls of the blows, like Spanish moss in a squall. "Glenn," she said, he now realized for the fifth time, and her voice trembled as another hand collided with the sternum. He jerked up against the headboard and rubbed his face with the sides of his knuckles. "Cindy, what?" "Wake up, Glenn. It's 8:02, she was saying in a voice that told him that time was the least of his worries. "Cindy," he slid a hand down and caught her wrist, and he felt her blue-jeaned legs languished across his knees. "Glenn, are you awake? Can you hear me?" Yeah, I can hear you. Geez, what?" "This," she said, holding up a white roll of paper, the size of a pencil, the good kind Glenn had once seen grade school intellectuals, not him, certainly not, but the intellectuals, rubbed down to a nub over a semester's time. The roll was about an October's length. "What is this? I found it in Seth's room under the fake begonias in his dresser. What is this?" Glenn blinked at the bulge in the center of the roll. I think it's pot." "I knew it. God, I knew it." She slid off the bed and walked out of the room. Cindy was already dressed in her button-up shirt and casual flats. During the silent moment of her retreating footsteps, Glenn slid back into lucid sleep, or he dreamed of walking down a corridor into a basketball court shaped like a shamrock. Then his son's rumbling yell awoke him for good. "Mom!" Seth's voice bounded down the hall. "Marijuana," she heard Cindy shout in reply, nearly a sob, audibly huffing the airy Spanish J. Glenn kicked the legs out of the sheets, letting his feet drop to the floor, and walked down the hall to Seth's room, where Cindy was standing erect at the threshold, one hand at her hip and the other holding the joint between her thumb and index finger, as if she were the one about to smoke it. "Listen, just because it's illegal doesn't mean it's bad," Seth said. He was sitting in his bed, pulling on his sneakers, his $80 sneakers that he said he had needed for track, begged. "The whole American Revolution was illegal, for crying out loud." "No, Seth, you're pulling that?" Cindy dropped her face into her palm and held the joint. Glenn cleared his throat and said, "Seth, don't argue with your mother. You'll make yourself late for school." His voice rumbled with post-sleep baritone, a heft it usually lacked. "Mom already made me late," his son said at the floor. "This is not the issue," Cindy said, looking up at Glenn through corkscrews of hair. Glenn looked back at her, into her desperate, angry, both, her face. Behind her was the plastic potted begonia, ragged and lopsided from Cindy's shakedown, its imitation leaves yanked halfway out of the knobs that held them in their stems. "Look, don't be an idiot, Seth," he said. "Couldn't you at least wait until, your grades are up or something?" "Glenn!" "Dad, stay out," Seth said. "You're always butting in, so just let me and Mom talk now. Please, go put on a shirt or something." He stood up and shouldered his backpack, the backmost compartment unzipped and flapping. "I'm going to school." When he left, in the car he also needed for track, Cindy turned her body toward Glenn and said rigidly, "What are you talking about?" "What?" Glenn said. He shoved his hand down to his thighs and rubbed the knobs of his hips. I think he should be able to smoke pot if he wants. Don't tell me you never did." "I didn't." "Listen, I think he should be able to try it if he really wants to. It's better than the alternatives, At least he's not into heroin or a meth head or robbing banks. He's 18, Cindy." "You're hungover. Glenn, are you listening to yourself? You're hungover, aren't you? Go eat some damn eggs or something and snap out of it. Glenn." "I'm not hungover," he said, and it was the truth this time. "Pipe down, will you?" She paused, her fingernails hooked around her lip. "Get out," she finally said, "for the day or the afternoon or whatever. I just need you gone now. Please leave." So Glenn grabbed his long-sleeved t-shirt and left. He drove off down the drive in their blue Dodge Caravan, savoring every clank of the loose exhaust pipes over the potholes and scaly cracks in the pavement. 15 minutes later, he arrived at Carl's house, at the grassy fringe of town. Carl was a business professional with a trim Steven Spielberg beard, and he and Glenn had been friends for 3 years. It's just for the day, man." Glenn told him when he answered the door. "Everything's fine. I'm sorry to be here so early." No, it's fine, Carl said. "It's Gloria's birthday, so I took the day off anyway. I took a half day anyway. I'm gonna bake her a cake." He would be back by lunch, he told Glenn, so in the meantime he should feel free to help himself to the fridge or whatever. Carl rubbed his beard as he paced about the house, gathering his briefcase in business professionalism, and the bristles rasped against his fingertips. Several minutes after Carl had said sincerely, "Bye, we'll talk for real when I get back," and driven off toward the heart of town, Glenn decided to take up both his wife's command and his friend's offer in one fell swoop, and fix some eggs from the refrigerator. He bent over the fizzing frying pan and, pushing the congealing egg over the bubbles of butter with the plastic spatula he had found in the third drawer next to the oven, folding and scraping the scrambled yolks over and over themselves until they crisped at the edges. The filmy shells he had poked down into the sink, drained into the garbage disposal, and ground to grit. "Geez, Seth," was the one thing he had thought during the process, wondering what kind of food his son craved when he was high. He finished the scrambling with a shake of black pepper and thought that Cindy had at least been right about the eggs after all. Hangover or no, he felt remarkably cogent. Glenn slid the dishes into the sink after the shells and soon fell asleep reading Popular Mechanics on Carl's living room couch. 2 hours later, he woke up and fried 3 more eggs in the kitchen, cracking the windows open to let out the fry pan haze. When Carl walked into his house that afternoon, the first thing he saw was the dishes in the sink. "You ate eggs?" he asked Glenn. His fingers sifted through the hair at the front line of his scalp. I needed eggs for Gloria's cake," Glenn said. "I left one in the carton in the refrigerator." "Well, I need more eggs for Gloria's cake." Carl forced audibly dry air through the back of his throat. I hate to ask you this, but I kind of need you to go to the store and pick up another dozen eggs, if you can." I would go, but I've started this. All right, I've got to get this started. She'll be home in 2 hours, and it's just the eggs. Please, I know it's an obligation, but you ate them, and I need you to do this now." "Gosh, I'm sorry," Glenn said, and he was sincere. "I'm really sorry. If there's anything else you need, I'll be glad to, So Carl gave him a post-it list from the refrigerator door, and Glenn left in the blue Caravan. The 3:30 p.m. grocery store parking lot was a cruel, shifting labyrinth with its chrome pieces sliding in and out and disappearing altogether, it seemed. He managed to park only by wedging the van into a space at an odd angle between a Volvo with a cracked bumper and a red station wagon washed cleaner than any wagon model Glenn had seen since the 90s. A man stood crouched by the open passenger door in the opposite side of the station wagon, changing a kicking baby's diaper in the bucket seat. Glenn saw him through the tinted back window, the swinging collar of his loose Michigan State t-shirt, and the close-trimmed hair around the edges of his ears. As he walked in through the rushing, air-conditioned wheeze of the opening automatic doors, the lump of his cell phone in his pocket reminded him of Cindy. He didn't call, though, and he halfway thought it felt like he shouldn't. He was worried about the eggs now. The list was only 11 lines of varying degrees of neatness, seemingly scrawled as random spurts of inspiration had struck Carl and Gloria over the past week, which accounted for the list's penchant for jumping from produce to Clorox bleach, to emery boards, and back to produce again. But aside from the anxious moment of indecision between crunchy and smooth on the peanut butter aisle, the shopping was quick. Glenn surprised himself with a deft ability for finding the items, despite having never visited the particular store. And he strode out of the automatic doors into the segmented sprawl of the store parking lot only 30 minutes after entering. All the while, his lips twitching open and closed with an unintelligible murmur. He told himself, "This is okay, I'm all right. I'm good at shopping." And again, "This is okay, I'm all right. I'm good at shopping." The Volvo was gone when Glenn arrived at the van, as was the man with his baby, though the station wagon was still parked in the adjacent space. A hot blast of greenhouse-affected air roared from the interior of the van as he opened the sliding door to sling the toilet paper, lettuce, bleach, etc. out of his shopping cart and into the middle seats. He sunk back into the swampy, crumb-crusted front seat a moment later, leaving the door dangling open to let in a breeze, and sat there for a moment that was just long enough to remind him that he had forgotten the eggs, the lousy eggs. He would get 24 of the things for good measure, he decided as he stepped back, out into the pavement, sidling around the empty cart he had left in the Volvo space. 36, he thought. An optimistic surge before his second step toward the supermarket doors dropped the heel of his right shoe into a diaper lying on the asphalt space between his car and the station wagon. When he lifted his foot, he saw the diaper crushed onto the parking lot like a swatted cockroach. Opaque, liquid entrails trickled along cracked valleys in the blacktop. The thicker excrement clung to the sole of his shoe, having squeezed its way into the rubber treads. Glenn waited 10 seconds, slowly counting up by twos in his head while staring down at the shoe print in the diaper batter. He got all the way to 18. Then, with the intentionality of a man behind the wheel of a large automobile, he peeled the diaper from the asphalt with his whole hand and slung it against the side of the station wagon. Glenn took great satisfaction in the wet slab, and the wads stuck to the passenger side door for a few seconds before flopping back to the ground. "Hey man, what the hell?" a voice shouted behind him. Glenn turned and saw the owner of the station wagon marching toward him, pushing the baby in a jittering cart full of paper grocery sacks. The man let the wheels slide to a stop behind Glenn's van and ran to the side of his own car, crouching beside the brown streak of diaper residue like it were a peeling gash in the paint, as if Glenn had keyed his car or sideswiped it. "What's your problem?" He was still shouting, so Glenn shouted back, "What's your problem? Diapers go in the trash, douchebag." The man stood up and looked at the remains of the diaper. "That's not even the brand I buy. And I keep a dirty diaper bag in the car anyway. Look, if you're in for a good time, I'll let you root back through it and find the fresh one I took off my kid half an hour ago. If you make me root through that, I'll shove your head in up to your neck," Glenn said. He kicked the diaper against the station wagon's rear tire. "Someone called the cops on this guy," the man said, turning back to his car. The baby kicked at the basket with his miniature blue sneakers. Looking at the man, Glenn felt an energy rush through him, and for a second he thought he was going to vomit. The feeling shifted, and instead he stepped forward, leaning his full weight into the shoe and swung his fist at the man. The man ducked the punch and jumped back, and Glenn, he was feeling strong now. Glenn shoved his empty shopping cart squarely at the man's belt buckle. 15 minutes later, Glenn was sitting in the holding cell of a police station, nursing a bloody nose between a clotted Kleenex and his left thumb. An officer had been patrolling a block from the grocery store when a store patron had called 911. Glenn made his phone call to Cindy. "Tell Carl I couldn't get the eggs," he told her, realizing for the first time that day that he had forgotten to shave. When she arrived at the station, he heard her footsteps coming down the hall before he actually saw her, the stabbing of heels on tile. The officer opened the door, and Cindy marched right up next to him until he could feel the resentment in every step closer she took, the clenching and slackening of each muscle along her thighs, stomach, shoulder, and diaphragm. "Jesus, Glenn," she said in a ragged voice, a vacuous moment after she had stopped beside him. She had been crying, he could now tell. He might have said something to her then, or at least tried to find her hand to squeeze, but he had no desire to make himself feel better. At that specific moment, he hated, with a heaving of briny vigor, every cell in his own body, every decision, diapers, eggs, track shoes, minivans, that had led him up to that holding cell.